Nomasis, and we've prepared a little webinar for the people who are taking part today on the subject of Apple DEP and VPP. I take it that there are quite a number of participants today taking part in this webinar, so I suspect or presume that your experiences regarding DEP and VPP, whether you use it or not, whether you haven't used it or are considering perhaps using it in the future, may be rather wide-ranging. So I think it's a good thing that we're concentrating on the basic aspects of these two Apple programs, and hopefully you'll find them useful. And of course, we hope that if you do intend to implement these solutions within your company or organization, that you'll get in touch with Nomasis, and we'll gladly help you out on that. So let's start off with a brief overview of the different subjects that we're going to be talking about today. An overview of DEP General, so that's the Device Enrolment Programme from Apple, which has actually been around for quite a number of years, actually. It was back in 2011, 2012, release of iOS 7 already, when this program was actually started up. However, it's taken quite a few years to mature, and of course for usage by larger companies and organizations, the integration into existing MDM solutions and platforms was kind of critical, really, for the adoption of the whole program, and has now matured quite enough for it to be very useful in many situations, and hopefully we'll be able to develop that in the coming presentation. Secondly, we'll talk about provisional DEP, which is something new, which has been made available by Apple since the release of iOS 11, which basically allows you to go beyond what was initially offered by Apple and some restrictions that were imposed regarding the purchase of certain devices. We'll get into that in more detail a bit later. A review of VPP, so that's the Volume Purchase Program, which is basically, let's say, a corporate licensing scheme, which allows you to purchase paid for apps naturally and distribute them to your users, but also allows you to manage free apps in such a way that your MDM platform can distribute apps seamlessly to your users using this program. A couple of business case examples, examples that we have either helped to set up or and certainly witnessed with some of our smaller and larger customers, but I'll show you just a couple of examples of how you can leverage these two solutions, in both cases VPP and DEP together, but of course they can be used independently. There'll be it's not quite directly, well, it is direct in a way related to DEP and VPP, but that's also a brief kind of bonus chapter on iOS supervision, what that means, and how it can be beneficial for your company or organization, and just a brief overview of what this type of mode allows you to do. And then we'll close off with a question and answer session with these questions that you submitted to Lorenz, our moderator. I'll remind you through the chat application in WebEx. So let's start. Apple DEP, Device Enrolment Program. Some of the highlights. What it allows you to do, for example, is regarding staging of devices and things like that. So we well know that getting devices ready to be given to your users, of course, we're mainly talking about corporate-owned devices here, not so much BYOD, of course. So that's a clear distinction we have to make from the outset. However, here, for example, you can deliver a device to your users, hundreds of devices to hundreds of users, fresh in the box. They can unwrap them, open them up, and start the process of registering their device on your MDM platform, whichever MDM platform of choice you have, and they'll go through a very quick process of setting up the device. So that's a very neat feature, which has to be mentioned, of course, and this comes with all the following examples I'll show here. Skip most setup screens, for example, which will allow you, we'll see this in a couple of slides, how many different steps there currently are for setting up an iOS device. It's at least 100% larger than it was not so long ago, as you'll see, as I said, in a couple of slides. But here you have the option to uncheck many of the setup screens. Obviously, there are several that you have to keep to comply with your MDM policies that you set up, for example, like setting up a password and so forth, so you can avoid having your devices in non-compliant states and having compliance actions applied to them, etc. I think it'll be quite obvious when we see the screen itself just in a second. Third point here is the supervised mode, which I spoke about just a bit now, and we'll tell you a bit more about towards the end of the webinar, which is being able to put the iOS device in this particular mode, which allows many, many more restrictions. It's called lockdown policies for Android devices. With a lockdown, in the concept, the word used for iOS devices, restrictions, allowing or disallowing the use of certain functionalities on the phone. Of course, in the idea being to secure your devices in such a manner that are compliant with your company policies or however you wish to manage your company-owned devices. And of course, this supervised mode here with Apple DEP will happen over the air. That's OTA. It's abbreviated, meaning that there's no need to do anything special to the device or have to hook it up to any kind of cable or thing, USB cable, things like that. It all happens over the air. Another big advantage with Apple DEP when rolling out devices, and especially combined with the volume purchase program, is that you can provide devices to your users, which upon enrollment, when entering, for example, a username and password, will have all the necessary business apps, clients, MDM clients and their business apps installed with no need for an Apple ID. A bit like a containerized solution where your business apps are installed automatically when you register your device, and then, of course, the rest of the device you can use as you will with your own Apple ID for private use, etc. So we're having here the COPE model of company-owned privately enabled type devices, but where users do not require an Apple ID to be able to use their device in a business context. The MDM onboarding will be mandatory. The nature of the DEP program is that once you start up the device, once it's connected to a Wi-Fi network, you will be prompted in every case to register in the MDM system, which of course, the following item indicates, will allow you a much closer and, let's say, strict management of your corporate device fleet. And as I kind of evoked earlier on, the staging time, of course, is massively reduced and, of course, can help alleviate quite a lot of pressure on your IT services for companies who actually spend time having to manually stage devices before delivering them to their users. All these stages can be bypassed, and therefore a valuable gain of time, and of course reducing of costs. So the whole DEP process in itself, what exactly happens, what are the requirements for you to be able to set this up? Does it cost anything? Well, the first step is to enroll in the Apple program, the Device Enrolment Programme. It's quite straightforward to do. You just go to the enrollment site, create an account with a corporate Apple ID. It is free to use. You do not need any special Apple developer account or something like that. You can just simply sign up to this. The second part will be to create your MDM platform entry in the Apple portal, indicating which, basically entering the address of your MDM platform on the Apple portal, which will then allow you to download a token, which you will then place on your MDM server, and that will link both the account and your MDM server together in order for the MDM to be able to manage the devices and interact and share information with the Apple database. So then you assign the devices to the MDM server. Again, this is done on the Apple portal itself by either the means of a CSV file containing all serial numbers of the devices you've purchased, or the order number, order ID of the purchase, and a couple of other different ways that allows you to upload that information to the Apple portal, which will then be synchronized with your MDM solution. Then on the MDM platform itself, you create enrollment profiles, which we'll have a quick look in a second, and allows you to create different profiles for different users or groups. We'll get to that in a second, and then assign your certain devices to these different profiles. There's also a default profile, of course, if you just wish to have the one. And then once that's done, once devices are connected to the internet and they go through the enrollment process, they'll automatically be assigned that profile. So this is an example of our setup here at Nomasis. In this case, it's mobile iron MDM, but of course this can apply to others. If we just go a few little details here, you see the default enrollment profile, and that can be the default one if none is manually assigned to a device. Otherwise, you have to actually manually assign profiles. Authentication type. Now, the most common one used by, I'd say, all our customers so far is the password authentication, which basically means username and password, okay, as registered in your MDM platform. The PIN authentication type requires devices to be pre-registered on the MDM, i.e. Uploaded by a CSV file, for example. So devices are basically, let's say, pending, waiting for registration, and then a PIN can be provided to the user for them to enroll the device. And the last authentication type is anonymous, which is not very often used, and in this case, what it will do is it will allow you to, for example, have devices that you will give out to certain people, and they will sign on. They'll use the sign-on app to use the device with their given profile, but the actual enrollment will be done anonymously. Now, important options here that we have underneath is enable supervision, of course, which is what I talked about earlier, which is in part one of the main reasons you'd want to use DEP, other than the actual user-friendliness of the whole enrollment process. Other than that, require MDM enrollment. That's pretty basic. It goes without saying that that's what you want it to do, of course, which is the enrollment screen that appears after the device is connected to the internet. And allow MDM profile removal. In most cases, you won't want to do that, but it can be useful for the type of environment, the context that you're working in. Perhaps you may wish for people to be able to remove this profile, but in most cases you won't be. As you see on the right-hand side here, we have the now very lengthy series of setup assistance steps that can be skipped or left active. Of course, quite a few here apply to macOS, tvOS only. That won't apply to iOS, but for some customers it may well be interesting to know that DEP also works with macOS, of course. tvOS is perhaps not really the subject of this webinar, but as you can see, there's a whole series of steps in the setup assistant that can be skipped and therefore reduce quite greatly the interaction needed from the user and, of course, the time needed to enroll the device. Moving on now, so that was DEP generally speaking. There's one aspect of DEP that is new since iOS 11, which is basically that Apple opened up the possibility for any device with iOS 11 to be not enrolled, but enrolled in the program, in the DEP program. There are a few things you need to know about this. One is that, of course, you need iOS 11. Some devices are not compatible with iOS 11, the iPhone 4, the 4S, the iPhone 5, they're all they cannot be upgraded to iOS 11, so that's something to take into account. You need a Mac computer with a USB cable attached, tethered to the device, and Configurator 2, which is an application that runs on Mac OS exclusively, and with which you would set up what they're called blueprints that allow you to communicate with the Apple DEP program servers in order to upload, let's say, to activate this particular device with that particular serial number and integrate it into your DEP program. So as I said, the devices need to be tethered by a USB, so it's not yet possible to do this over the air. Another caveat is that users, once the device has been added to the program in using this method, they will have 30 days to exit the program. That's something that Apple has left in place for users, of course, who may want to keep their device once they leave the company or something like that. But once the 30 days have passed, then the management, the enrollment into DEP can still be removed from that particular device by using the Apple DEP portal. Yes, as I said, USB tethering. You can use USB hubs to do many devices at the same time. Other programs, this is using Mac with Configurator 2, but ground control, for example, which is also an iOS management platform, can also apply these types of blueprints to devices in order to enroll them in DEP. Of course, this could be very interesting for some companies, cost-conscious companies who have perhaps fleets of devices that are iOS 11 capable, but who do not wish to purchase new devices, who want to recycle older ones. It's something you have to obviously evaluate to see if it's a worthy process or not, and if the cost-benefit is what you're looking for. Of course, I just wanted to point this out just so that you know that it actually exists. These are the prerequisites for provisional DEP. I'll just leave this for you to see on the screen now. And now Apple VPP, the Volume Purchase Program. So what is it? It is a program that allows you to distribute apps from the App Store. Either they be free or paid apps. As I said earlier on, it's basically a corporate licensing scheme. You can buy corporate credit card, etc., buy a certain number of licenses for any given app, whether it be free or paid. And then there's a very important distinction to make here. It's between user-based licenses and device-based licenses. You can distribute your apps on a user-based license, but that will imply that the user himself will have to enter their own Apple ID, and then they'll have to agree with the terms and conditions to be basically linked to the corporate ID that was used to purchase the apps. And in this case, the user would be able to reclaim those licenses if they leave the company, for example, and so forth. But it's not the most widely used solution because it can be complicated with the account management and so forth. So in most cases, we advise using device-based licenses. Slight disadvantage of device-based licenses, of course, is that one license will be used up per device used. So if you have a user who has an iPhone, who has an iPad, they install twice the same app, they will actually use up 2 of those licenses. Okay, this is important to know, of course, mainly for apps that require payment. Of course, it's much less of a concern if you're using VPP to distribute apps to users' devices that are free, of course. In that case, you just have to purchase more licenses, purchase in a way more free licenses than you have users. Okay, so For VPP, what are the requirements? I forgot to say, did I forget to say? I'm not sure. DEP, of course, does not require payment of any sort to enroll in the program, and the same applies to VPP. It's free of charge. But there are a few things that you will need. You'll need your DUNS identifier, the MDM platform, of course, corporate Apple ID, and your VPP account. And again, as stated earlier, for DEP, you do not need an Apple Developer Program, which is a paid service from Apple. You do not need that to use both DEP and or VPP. So here's a summary for you to have a look at. Of course, I think we will be distributing the presentation later on for future reference if you ever need to review the different bits of information that we've provided here. Okay, so there's no, you don't have to use both DEP and VPP. They can be used independently, of course. BYOD and corporate devices supported, etc. Employees can still use device for private business, of course. You know, if you're separating business from private, but still enabling the user to use the device for private matters. No need for Apple ID. Silent install of apps with no prompts, as we said earlier on. The Apple ID. And as I said, the user device-based licensing, an important decision to make when you're using a corporate Apple ID. So a couple of quick examples here that rollouts that we've done with some of our customers. Large-scale rollouts, 2,000 devices. I think it was 2,500 actually. When they decided to give up on Windows Phone and go back to iOS devices. All of them were purchased directly from Apple in this case. They enrolled into the program and so forth, and over 2,500 devices were nearly seamlessly given out to users with very little interaction needed from IT services, and it was a major successful rollout. And of course, the whole DEP process, given that your devices are registered with Apple, means that recycling and the whole recycling of device and the whole life cycle management of devices becomes much easier to manage. Another example for a completely different use was in Cantonella Hospital here in the east of Switzerland. As you can see, iPads, a whole bunch of iPads were set up with DEP VPP. iPads were set up with kind of, you know, test accounts, let's say, guest accounts. Everything's installed, and every time the users can use them as they wish, of course. And every time the patient, you need to pass the iPad to a new patient, you just have to wipe the device, set it up as a new one. There's nothing else to do, and your iPad fleet is always ready for action for your patients, and they very much appreciate the way that functions for them. So just a quick peek here at the supervised mode on iOS devices and what it actually allows you to do. We'll have a look in the next slide exactly how many of the iOS restrictions, which you could call lockdown possibilities, iOS restrictions can be used once you have a supervised device. We'll have a look at that in the next slide. Silent app install means no prompting to install apps when you distribute them with your MDM platform. Activate loss mode, which is an interesting mode for, pardon me, that you can use with supervised devices. That means through your MDM platform, you can activate this mode, and then you will be able, because the device is supervised, you'll be able to overrun the potential restrictions on location, right? GPS coordinates, which allowed you to determine where the device last connected or was last detected and located. Once that device has been found, if at all possible, then you can deactivate the loss mode. We've used that quite a few times with several of our customers, and it's pretty handy in avoids having to unnecessarily lose devices. Reboot power off of device remotely. this is something that may well be of interest to several of you, which is either pushing iOS system updates. For example, when you've put the minimum version of your iOS version higher in your security policy, and you wish that people update to this version, then you can trigger the near automatic. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. The near automatic updating of the iOS version. And on the other hand, this is something that's recent. I think it's from iOS 11.3, which came out very recently, which is the ability to delay the installation of updates, of iOS updates on the devices for up to 3 months, 90 days. So if you're concerned with in-house apps, for example, that you wish to test to make sure that they're running properly before you allow users to update, this is something that could very much be of benefit to you. Set up screen layout, that's the way that the icons are disposed, and background image, so for some kind of corporate identity and let's say uniformity, these are options that are not essential, but certainly could be nice to use. And one other important possibility with supervised devices only is that you can unlock phones, unlock devices generally speaking, unlock devices that have activated Find My Phone, which, as you may know, once you activate Find My Phone or Find My iPad, you'll activate the activation lock, which means that if the user does not enter their Apple ID and password, the device basically becomes unusable. So it's very important if you have users that do not unlock their device basically before returning it to the company or organization, that you have this possibility here to be able to unlock the phone either remotely or by entering it manually. Here's just a brief illustration of the types of options. All the ones highlighted in yellow offer supervised devices only. As you can see, there's quite a few that are there, and I think this has actually been extended. This is the view from Mobile Iron Core, but it's very similar in other MDM platforms. I see the time is flying, so I'm very sorry about that. So if there are any questions, we're going to have to make it very quick, or we'll take note of them and get back to you as soon as we can, perhaps probably by tomorrow, if there's anything that you require information about. So thank you very much.